3 days before year-end closing, the 1 week when a single wrong number can cripple a Fortune 500, my boss fired me in front of half the finance floor. No warning, no cause, just a smirk. I was the only person who knew how to close the books without triggering an IRS audit. Now, nobody did. And in 72 hours, that mistake would freeze billions. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I just walked out and let the clock start ticking. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe if you want to see how silence became my sharpest weapon. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. 3 days before year-end closing, Dean Carter, our brand new COO, stood in the middle of the 37th floor and told me my job was over. He didn't call me into a private office. He didn't even lower his voice. He made sure the entire finance floor could hear every word, like he was delivering a corporate sermon. "Jessica Monroe, your services are no longer required," he said, sliding a printed termination letter toward me across the polished conference table. Ellen Pierce, the CEO, was unavailable. Marcus Hayes, the CFO, stared at the tabletop like he'd forgotten how to make eye contact. I knew exactly what this was. A show of force. Dean wanted to prove he could cut anyone. He thought he was making an example of me, but what he'd actually done was pull the one gear the entire year-end closing machine depended on. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a reason. I closed my laptop, placed it neatly in my bag, and slid my coffee mug into the cardboard box HR had handed me like a prop. Then I walked out, silent, steady, letting them believe I was leaving defeated. Inside, I was counting the hours, because when you fire the only person who knows how to close your books without triggering an IRS audit, you don't just take a risk, you light a fuse. And in 72 hours, Dean Carter was going to learn exactly what kind of explosion he'd set in motion. When I started at Northern Financial Group 10 years ago, we weren't the corporate giant you see splashed across the business news. Back then, we were a regional player with modest clients, an outdated accounting system, and processes so tangled you could spend a week chasing a $5 discrepancy. I came in as a junior accountant, but it didn't take long to see where the real danger lived, in the cracks the software couldn't see. The program worked fine for routine entries, but during high-volume months, it created errors no one else even recognized. Foreign currency transactions rounded incorrectly, interest from certain investment products posted in the wrong ledger, and timing differences between subsidiary reports left mismatches big enough to raise red flags if anyone looked too closely. I didn't just fix these errors, I memorized their patterns. I learned the order in which the reconciliations had to be run so the system wouldn't choke on its own data. Over the years, I became the invisible insurance policy. Nothing in my job description said I had to clean up everyone else's mistakes, but I did it because I knew the cost of letting them slide. By the time Northern was handling billions, those small adjustments weren't optional. They were the backbone of every quarterly report. Without them, the books would never close cleanly, and at year-end, the IRS doesn't forgive software hiccups. They launch full-scale audits. An audit at our size doesn't just cost money. It freezes operations, scares off clients, and tanks investor confidence. And here's the part Dean Carter never grasped. Those fixes weren't written down anywhere. Not in manuals, not in shared folders, not in the software documentation. They lived in my head. And now, I was gone. Dean Carter came in swinging the corporate buzzwords: efficiency, modernization, process optimization. The kind of language that makes executives nod and employees roll their eyes. He saw my role as an outdated expense, convinced the accounting software could do everything I did. Marcus Hayes, the CFO, should have spoken up, but instead he stayed quiet, probably figuring I'd adapt or disappear. Dean never asked how the year-end close actually worked. Never sat down to see the sequence of steps I followed. Never even considered that the system's automated processes were designed for textbook accounting, not the complex, layered transactions Northern processed every single day. His timing was the fatal error. Firing me in December wasn't just careless. It was like yanking the pilot out of a plane mid-descent and assuming the autopilot could land it. Year-end isn't just another month. Every mismatch is magnified, every reconciliation is critical, and one wrong adjustment can cascade through hundreds of accounts in minutes. Dean thought anyone with the right credentials could sit in my chair and get the same result. He didn't understand that my process wasn't something you could hand off. It was the only thing keeping the system from collapsing under its own weight. The morning after I walked out, the finance floor looked calm enough from the outside, but I knew the moment they started the closing process, the cracks would show. By mid-morning, they hit the first wall, a batch of investment interests that wouldn't reconcile. It was the same glitch I'd been correcting manually for years, invisible to the untrained eye, but devastating if ignored. They didn't recognize it, so they fixed it by forcing a ledger entry to balance. That single move shifted the discrepancy to the derivatives account, where it compounded into a six-figure mismatch within an hour. Fixing that broke the deferred tax schedules, which in turn threw off the subsidiary consolidations. It was like watching someone try to patch a leaking dam with chewing gum. Every plug they added only made another hole burst open. By the end of the day, they were staring at 147 unexplained variances, each one tangled into three others. Dean tried to reassure the floor, calling it normal year-end adjustments. Marcus didn't look reassured. I knew his silence meant he'd started to understand. This wasn't a series of random errors. It was the natural unraveling of a system built on knowledge they no longer had. And in less than 48 hours, those errors would be locked into the official year-end submission. They could call in as many consultants as they wanted, but no one could untangle the knots in time. The numbers don't care about ego, titles, or boardroom politics. They only care about accuracy. And when the accuracy dies, the system takes everyone down with it. On December 31st at exactly 11:59 p.m., the financial reporting system did what it was programmed to do. It auto-submitted Northern Financial Group's fourth quarter and year-end reports to the IRS, errors and all. No one in that glass tower realized yet that they'd just handed a loaded gun to a federal auditor. By the time most people were shaking off their New Year's hangovers, the first flag appeared. At 9:07 a.m. on January 2nd, the IRS marked Northern's filing for irregularities requiring full review. Those words are corporate poison. By 9:45, Bloomberg had the story. At 10:15, CNBC went live from outside Northern's headquarters, and the stock ticker began to bleed red. In less than 2 hours, Northern's market value had dropped nearly 25%. By the close of trading that day, it was down 40%. Clients flooded their account managers with calls, demanding to know why the company's filings were under review. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Competitors began circling like vultures, ready to poach accounts. Inside the building, Dean Carter had abandoned his confident stroll and was now storming between cubicles, demanding updates. The correction team he'd assembled was drowning in mismatches. Every attempted fix caused another part of the financial structure to fail, and the clock was no longer on their side. With the audit triggered, every correction would now be scrutinized by the IRS, meaning they couldn't even move fast enough to stop the bleeding. Marcus Hayes was pale, his phone glued to his ear as he tried to explain to board members how a Fortune 500 company could implode in 72 hours without a single external attack. No one was ready to say it out loud yet, but the truth was unavoidable. The moment they fired me, they set this in motion. And now, the collapse wasn't coming. It was here, rolling through the company floor by floor, faster than anyone could stop it. All I had to do was sit back and watch the storm I didn't even have to create. A federal audit is not a slap on the wrist, it's a full stop. Once the IRS begins, every account is frozen, every pending transaction is locked, and every contract that depends on uninterrupted financial services is suddenly in jeopardy. For Northern Financial Group, that meant billions sitting idle, clients unable to move their funds, and new deals evaporating before they could be signed. Every day under audit bled millions. The board called an emergency closed-door meeting. Dean Carter walked in looking like a man who'd just read his own obituary. When he emerged hours later, his jaw was tight, his eyes bloodshot, and his LinkedIn status read, "Open to work," by the end of the week. Marcus Hayes was less visible, holed up in his office, sending short, clipped messages to the floor and ignoring most calls. The real humiliation came when the calls to me started. First, it was Marcus, offering a temporary return to help stabilize the books. Then a board member I'd never spoken to before, trying to frame it as an opportunity to repair the relationship. Finally, Dean himself, voice cracking just enough to betray the panic under his words. "Jessica, we need you back. Name your terms." I didn't answer any of them. This wasn't vindictiveness, it was principle. They'd made a decision without understanding its consequences, and now those consequences belonged to them. There was no patch big enough to cover this hole, no shortcut that would undo the ripple effect once an audit this size was in motion. Their arrogance had written the ending long before they realized the game was even in play. And now, the only thing left for them to do was watch their empire sink under the weight of their own ignorance, while I stayed exactly where I was, untouched, unreachable, and entirely out of their control. On January 5th, I sat by my apartment window with a fresh cup of coffee, watching snow drift past the skyline. State Street was quiet, the kind of winter stillness that makes the city feel smaller. I hadn't been inside Northern's offices in days, but I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. The audit was in full swing, their stock was still tumbling, and the press had begun speculating about leadership changes. Dean Carter's name was now mentioned alongside phrases like failed oversight and costliest executive mistake of the quarter. Marcus Hayes had gone silent in the media, no longer the polished voice of investor confidence. I hadn't lifted a finger since the day I walked out. No sabotage, no hidden agenda. I simply stopped doing the work no one else knew how to do, and let the system run exactly as it had been designed, flawlessly dependent on me. They'd thought removing me would show strength. Instead, it revealed every weakness they'd buried under shiny reports and confident press releases. My revenge wasn't loud and it wasn't fast, but it was complete. And as the snow kept falling, I realized there was nothing sweeter than winning without saying a word. 15 years of knowledge walked out that door with me, and they didn't realize until it was too late that some losses can't be replaced with money, software, or quick hires. In corporate America, decisions made in arrogance often carry a delayed cost, one that compounds silently until it explodes. This story isn't about sabotage, it's about the invisible weight certain people carry for an organization. You can't see it on a spreadsheet, and you can't measure it with KPIs, but when it's gone, the absence is deafening. In my case, the company's downfall came from their own inability to recognize the quiet, critical work that kept them afloat. The lesson here isn't just for executives. It's for anyone navigating the modern workplace. Know your value, document it for yourself, but understand that sometimes the smartest move is walking away and letting the truth reveal itself. For leaders, respect the roles you don't fully understand, because the people in them might be holding your entire operation together. For employees, don't waste energy proving your worth to someone determined not to see it. Sometimes silence, Patience and timing are the most effective tools you have. How to get started today. 1. Write down your core contributions, the ones no one else can replicate. 2. Identify which processes depend on your knowledge, not just your title. 3. Build your own career insurance by knowing exactly where your leverage is. If you've ever been underestimated at work or seen arrogance take down a team, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale of corporate justice served cold.